If you need closed captioning, click on the CC button, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you may need to click on the More menu option if you don't see it to access the closed captioning. I'm Dana Abbey, and I'm an engagement specialist with Region 4 based at the Strauss Health Sciences Library on the Anschutz Medical Campus here in Aurora, Colorado. This map illustrates the 7 regions of the network of the National Library of Medicine, or NNLM, and Region 4 is comprised of 9 states: Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. It's just a mere 1 million land miles. And the NNLM is the outreach arm of the National Library of Medicine. And our guiding mission is to provide equal access to biomedical information and improve an individual's access to information to enable them to make informed decisions about their health. We collaborate with various organizations like public and academic libraries, schools, hospitals, public health departments, and community-based organizations. And we have 3 main pillars that drive the work that we do. It's to provide funding to organizations, conduct outreach, and offer training like today's webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. As an attendee, you agree to the NNLM Code of Conduct, so please keep all interactions respectful. And today's session will be recorded and the slides will be made available. But just know it can take us 2 weeks to get everything all nice and buttoned up for you to be able to look at those archives. And we will be sharing the CE link at the end of the session. And we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to enter your questions or comments into the chat box. We will have our next R4 Connections in March, and we'll share details on what that session will be on the webpage, blog, and via our weekly newsletter. And if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, we'll put the link into the chat box. And if you're attending from outside of Region 4, you're still welcome to sign up for our newsletter. But you might want to also just visit nnlm.gov to connect with your region. So I'm so happy to introduce our speaker today. Victoria Watson is the Assistant Director of Health Promotion and Basic Needs at the University of Colorado, Denver. Over the past 10 years, her career has spanned across the areas of prevention and wellness education, language education, and student success in various K-12 and higher education institutions. In addition to Victoria's work in various US-based institutions, she has significant experience leading educational programs internationally in Spain and Costa Rica. Victoria holds a BA in Spanish from Temple University and a Master of Education in International Higher Education from Loyola University, Chicago. As a first-generation college graduate, Victoria is committed to serving as a resource and mentor to support students through their college careers. Victoria's current work centers on health education, including mental health, substance misuse prevention, opioid overdose response awareness, sexual education, and stress management. She also oversees CU's Denver's Basic Needs Center, a resource designed to ensure that students have access to free food, emergency funding, SNAP enrollment, and resource referrals. When she's not on campus, Victoria enjoys spending time with her fiance and their fur family, hiking and camping, and going to Red Rocks Open Air Amphitheater for concerts. She also enjoys exploring group fitness classes, and Victoria is a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo and a seasoned kickboxing instructor. So thank you so much for being here today, Victoria. I will turn the stage over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dana, and thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be here with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen here. All right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So it looks like a few of you already mentioned where you're coming from this morning, but if you'd be so kind to just mention your name and what city or state you're joining from this morning. Like Dana said, my name is Victoria Watson. I'm with the University of Colorado, Denver. I will be discussing the power of mental health first aid. So some of you may be familiar with this program. It is an evidence-based program that is designed through the National Council on Mental Health Well-Being. I serve as a certified mental health first aid instructor at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I also oversee our program, which we started about 5 years ago. And we have trained over 200 individuals on our campus, and we're continuing to work to bring mental health first aid to all corners of our campus. So taking a look here, it looks like we have folks from many different states, which is wonderful. We have a little bit of snow today. So yeah, glad everyone can be here and like to see that some folks have been to Red Rocks. So we'll get started. So Dana gave a great introduction of who I am, so I'll keep it short. But like I mentioned, my role at CU Denver includes wearing many hats. So one of the primary roles is focusing on health promotion and mental health first aid and other resources for mental health and awareness for students is one of the main pillars of my work. With that, I also oversee our campus's opioid overdose response trainings. So I will mention that today as a mental health first aid course covers both mental health challenges as well as substance misuse challenges. So I'll speak a little bit more to that in the presentation as well. On our campus, we've created a program where we provide that training as well as access to free Narcan or naloxone to anyone in the CU Denver community. And then on the other side of the work, as Dana mentioned, basic needs, overseeing a team that works with our food pantry and making sure our students have all of their basic needs met so that they can focus on their academic work. My background, as Dana shared, spans from many different corners of the educational world. And right after my undergrad from Temple University, I focused my work on K through 12 prevention education and have been really grateful in the last few years to really return to that work at the higher education level and have the opportunity to share information about great resources like mental health first aid with you all. So what we will be discussing today, we're going to just really dive into what is the National Council on Wellbeing's Mental Health First Aid course, what are the goals of that program as a whole for the United States and beyond, what is the impact and the reach been of mental health first aid in the United States. I'll do a little sneak peek into what the structure of the course looks like so that if any of you are interested in taking the course yourself, which I highly recommend, you can have a little bit of a sneak peek of what that would look like. Like I mentioned, we'll talk about substance misuse as a component of the mental health first aid course, and then talk about resources related to mental health, as well as opportunities of where you could take the course. I do want to start with a disclaimer. So, mental health first aid covers topics that can be emotionally activating. The topics of mental health challenges, suicide, and substance misuse challenges will be mentioned in this webinar today. So, I encourage you to take care of yourself. Feel free to step away if the content does become difficult at any time for you. And one resource that you'll hear me share many times today, that is the main resource that we talk about in mental health first aid is the 988 Lifeline that is available for both individuals experiencing a mental health or substance misuse challenge, or individuals supporting someone and just trying to get some assistance of what next steps to take. So we'll talk more in depth about that resource later on as well. So why mental health matters for adults? These are a few statistics from the mental health first aid course. 1 in 5 American adults will experience a mental health disorder in a single year. 50%, almost half of all Americans, will experience a mental illness during the course of their lifetime. And over 20 million Americans ages 12 and over will face challenges with addiction at some point in their life. So we know as we share more awareness about the impact of mental health, how important it is. So I'm going to start by sharing this video, like I said, from mental health. This is talking about the impact and how to make a difference through the mental health first aid curriculum.
20% of people experience a mental illness in any given year.
And more than 20 million Americans ages 12 and older experience a substance use disorder each year.
That means that one of us is probably experiencing a mental health or substance use problem right now.
But the statistics also say that the person among us with a mental illness or addiction won't ask for help.
Only 41% of people with a mental health diagnosis receive treatment, either because it isn't available or they can't bring themselves to ask for help.
Instead, people try to hide their pain.
Your coworker hides his alcoholism with a quick sense of humor.
Your friend hides her plan to kill herself with a dismissive, "I'm fine."
And people who can clearly see their friends and loved ones suffering don't know what to say or what to do.
But you have the power to change your life. You can be the one to make a difference.
Mental health first aid gives people the knowledge they need to notice when someone is having a mental health or substance use challenge.
And it gives them the skills to start difficult conversations, bridging the gap between people who may need help and potentially life-saving supports.
And in a world that sometimes makes it feel impossible to ask for help,
It's up to all of us to know when and how to offer it.
This is our call to action.
A rallying cry for everyone in the country to become a resource in their community.
An invitation to make a bold statement that says, we won't allow our friends, family members, and colleagues to suffer in silence.
Are you with us? Get trained in mental health first aid.
Right. So to dive in a little bit more, what are the goals of mental health first aid as a program? The vision is for mental health first aid to become as common as CPR and available to anyone in the United States. So they use that term first aid truly in an effort to create an equivalent to a first aid program that so many millions of Americans take every year. One objective is also to demystify speaking of the entire topic of mental health and mental health challenges. So a main pillar of the curriculum is increasing mental health literacy and decreasing stigma. It is also very important to note that the content is not intended to be a substitute of for medical care, counseling, peer support, or treatment of any kind. And if you do take a course, you will hear instructors mention many times, as it's a really important piece of the curriculum, that mental health first aiders are not to diagnose, rather they're there to recognize the signs and symptoms and feel prepared to help individuals reach professional help. So that's one thing that I love about the course itself. I am not a clinician, I am not a doctor, but I am able to make an impact through my work, both as a mental health first aider as well as an instructor. So they've really created a very accessible course that can reach all individuals in our country. So a little history, mental health first aid actually first started in 2000 in Australia and has now been adapted in more than 25 countries across the globe. The content is evidence-based and evaluation studies show its effectiveness. There are a variety of both case studies as well as research from the US specifically demonstrating the efficiency of the program as well as how it has supported various sectors, so both higher ed, in corrections. It's been implemented in many different environments. In 2008, the course was brought to the US, and like I said, it is specifically through a partnership with the National Council on Mental Wellbeing and originally with the states of Maryland and Missouri. There's also a youth mental health first aid as well as a teen mental health first aid. So my work focuses on the adult mental health first aid course. There's many similarities, but there are 3 curriculums total, and they're also available in Spanish as well. So what is mental health first aid? Looking a little deeper.
I was surprised by how much I learned about taking care of my own mental health.
As a first aider, you can be a lifeline.
I am one of 4 million strong.
I am one of 4 million strong.
4 million strong.
I am one of the 4 million strong.
So over 4 million individuals have been trained in the United States alone. As I mentioned, it's evidence-based and the early intervention component of it is really important. So the way that the curriculum is designed is it helps individuals recognize the early signs and symptoms because we know that the recovery process is easier and most successful if individuals can receive help and have someone to talk about mental health challenges or substance use challenges in the early stages. So just like early intervention is best in all areas, we really focus on that. However, it also helps individuals to recognize when there are worsening signs and symptoms and how to recognize if a situation is a non-crisis situation or if it has reached a crisis or an emergency. So the goal is, like I mentioned, not to diagnose, but rather to recognize the signs and symptoms, know how to best support individuals. Language really matters. So we help individuals know what are the most helpful ways to say something, what are ways that might cause more harm, and then the ultimate goal is really helping individuals have those resources and feel empowered to move forward with professional help. So in the course, we learn the risk factors, warning signs, and then those resources that we would turn to for help. It also covers depression, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, trauma and the impact of trauma in mental health, psychosis, and substance use disorders. So the basics of the course and how it is set up. It's very interactive, but we do have options to take it either virtually on Zoom or in person. Like I mentioned, it's not a therapy or support group, but provides the information and helps build skills. It is offered in 2 formats. So the one that my institution and I think the majority offer is a 2-hour pre-work that individuals complete on their own to kind of lay the foundation, and then a 6-hour instructor-led session. So we offer instructor-led sessions both virtually as well as in person. There is also an option if someone wanted to do all 8 hours in person. That is the second format that Mental Health First Aid offers. And learners who complete the course do receive a certification, and there's also opportunities to become trained to be an instructor in your communities as well to further spread the program. So these are the 4 key themes that mental health first aid is centered around. Trauma, which according to SAMHSA is defined as an event or series of events that causes physical, emotional, or life-threatening harm to an individual. So we talk about being able to recognize that everyone's experiences could be different, and trauma plays a big a big role in how an individual is handling a mental health challenge. Stigma really shows up, and I think we have come a long way in changing the language that we use, changing the way that we talk about mental health challenges, and the mental health first aid curriculum does a great job of helping think about the words that we're saying and their impact, even if the intent is not to cause more harm. It also does a great job recognizing culture. So we are aware that one's culture really plays a significant impact in mental health conversations. So for example, when working with students, I work with a lot of international students who may be experiencing a challenge, and for them, that might look very different than referring them to the counseling center. In their culture, that might be very uncomfortable, or with family dynamics, that might be very difficult. So mental health first aid does an amazing job of helping us think, if someone's culture is different than ours, or we don't know much about it, keeping that in mind, as well as perhaps there's a better individual in their life that might be able to have those conversations with them. And then hope for recovery is a term we use a lot in the course. Recovery is a personal journey with the goals of hope, empowerment, and autonomy. So both recovery of a mental health challenge is achievable, as well as recovery from from substance misuse challenges as well. So that's always the goal, to provide that hope to help guide or get individuals to the appropriate resources to help them on their own journey to recovery. And then self-care is another big component of the course. So we talk in the course about how to help encourage self-care for others, but we also talk about the impact that helping someone through a challenge can have on ourselves. So maybe some of you have had those experiences of having really difficult conversations, supporting someone who is going through a mental health challenge, and it can really weigh very heavily. So thinking about the self-care for ourselves is really important. So if everyone could just take a moment and share maybe your preferred form of self-care. I know that for me, that changes a lot. Usually mine is exercise or doing something active, but lately it's actually been reading, which has been really refreshing. So we'll just pause if you are up to share. Awesome. I see, yeah, some time outside in the mountains, meditation, daily lunch walks, video games, painting, and that's the beauty of it. Everyone's form of self-care is different. It's very individualized, and that's something that we want to honor in the mental health first aid course, that our form of preferred self-care might not be what someone else's is. Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. So the mental health first aid curriculum helps folks think about their preferred form, and also other formats such as community. So whether that's a meetup or an exercise class that someone regularly attends to build community, or a religious group or a recovery group. So many different forms of self-care, and we really try to, honor everyone's different forms as well. And person-first language is another key component that, like I said, I think we've moved as a society in many ways. We've moved away from a lot of the terminology that we've previously used when talking about mental illness and or mental health challenges. And what is really important here is, some of these terms are very much ingrained. We've heard them for decades. It's how previously we did speak about mental health challenges, but moving to person first helps us think about the person as an individual rather than focusing on the mental health or substance challenge that they may be experiencing. So it keeps the person first, and is an approach with compassion and hope for recovery. So these are just a few examples. For example, when someone may be experiencing or living with a mental health disorder, it would be a person living with depression rather than someone who is depressed. for alcoholic, a person living with an alcohol use challenge or disorder. And then, of course, that term recovery, a person in recovery rather than someone who we might say is clean or an ex-addict. And this all takes time too. There's always going to be mistakes. There's always times where we're going to say a term that we previously used, but just being cognizant of this and sharing that language can play a really positive role on supporting others. Same thing when we do speak of suicide, we would say that someone attempted rather than a completed or failed. So really important, the power of language, and the curriculum itself really does dive into that a bit further. So before I move further, something I should have prefaced at the beginning is the curriculum, since it is evidence-based, it is very important for individuals to follow it to its fidelity, follow it fully. So this presentation, hopefully my goal is to really give you a great look into it. But of course, there's the content itself can't be shared. There's a couple pieces that just lay out the framework. But like I said in the beginning, I do hope that this is enough information for you to know what it would look like to then take the course yourself and have that true evidence-based experience. So if it feels like some things are left out, that's why. So a little bit more about the impact and the reach of mental health first aid. So like I mentioned earlier, over 4 million mental health first aiders have now been trained in the United States alone, and that number continues to rise. This is a neat map, might be a little hard to see, but this is the United States and what states have seen the most mental health first aiders trained. And on the mental health first aid website, you can actually sort, so you can look at your state, see what that looks like. You can also see here the differences of what sectors we see the most individuals getting certified in, as well as cities that have more as well. So I'm going to go back to this. So if you look here, public safety is a really big one. And I have a colleague who just completed her mental health first aid training. And I was really impressed to hear that about 70% of the other instructors in her training were all in law enforcement. So there's a lot of different sectors that are really utilizing mental health first aid and making it a requirement for their staff, from corrections to law enforcement to higher education, for folks working with veterans and also in rural areas. And we see a small little bubble even for tribal and indigenous communities. So hopefully we continue to see some of those smaller circles grow as we try to make mental health first aid more accessible. So you might be wondering where you can take mental health first aid. So you can take it in your community. It is becoming more and more popular. So this website that I have here is where all of this information is coming from today, in addition to some sources from the curriculum itself. You can look on their search function, and you can also see that there are sometimes recreation centers or community centers or churches that are offering mental health first aid for free or at a reduced cost. We also are working together and working with Dana to see if we can bring a session specifically for NNLM for Region 4. So stay tuned for more of those details. But yes, hoping that I can offer that for anyone who's interested as well. And it looks like, yeah, Samantha just shared that. So if you are curious about what might already be available in your community, definitely check that website out as well. There's a little search function there for where you can take that course. So like I mentioned, we will take a brief look into the curriculum itself. So the curriculum is in 7 segments, and we start with a recap. Some of the information I'm sharing today about the history is in that first section, making sure folks are reviewing the information they did on their own. And then we move into something that we call the ALGEE plan. That is acronym. That is our mental health first aid action plan. And that is really the bread and butter of the curriculum and how we help folks have an easy to follow acronym action plan that's going to help us when we are helping other individuals to remember the steps. Then the curriculum, really you spend the day starting with those early signs and symptoms, situations where maybe one conversation with a friend is enough. Maybe it is a temporary stressor or challenge, and that conversation can make the difference and is not a continued situation that has the risk for crisis. But as we go through the day, we help individuals recognize the worsening signs and symptoms, and then help individuals be able to determine, is this a crisis situation, and what would I do if I were in this situation? So how we do that in the course is through breakout rooms, especially online. If it's a larger course, it's really fun to be able to group people, especially when we do have folks from all different backgrounds and cultures and occupations. We do scenarios. So we take scenarios and have folks determine what were the signs and symptoms that you saw. Was it a crisis situation? What would you do? Videos, knowledge checks, and then a lot of skill-based practice, which is something I really appreciate about the curriculum. So you get the chance in a safe environment to really practice those skills that you learn. So ALGEE, the name always cracks me up, ALGEE. My partner was looking at it the other night and he was like, why didn't they just call it Eagle? So ALGEE, though, I won't ever forget it. It is a non-linear process. So you'll see here, we do start with the A when we teach it. We always, just as you would for first aid, you're assessing the situation. You want to make sure you're safe. In this step, we're really assessing for the risk of harm or suicide. And we're always coming back to this first step. So no matter, situation might change from minute to hour, day to day. So we always want to keep that in mind. The curriculum goes into how to listen non-judgmentally. Like I mentioned, there's some things that are ingrained in us. I know one thing that comes up a lot is when we're listening to someone, it's really easy to relate, and that can feel like a really good thing. But it's easy in human nature to say, I know exactly what you're going through, or I had this same exact thing happen last year. And in certain conversations, that might be totally okay. But when we're really going through the ALGEE plan, making sure we're listening first, sometimes saying, I know exactly what you've gone through can really discredit what the other person is experiencing. So in the L step, we really practice what that looks like. Then we give reassurance and information. So this step is really important. Especially with myths around mental health, we want to make sure we're giving factual information and reassurance that is reasonable. So over-promising someone, I promise everything will be better by next week, might feel helpful, but it won't be helpful for that situation. So really goes into the nuances of some things that might be easy to say, might be more comfortable to say, because the reality is in a lot of these conversations, we aren't always going to get it right, and that's okay. So having that time to practice and be prepared ahead of time can make the difference when we are in a situation. Encouraging professional help is, like I mentioned, one of the biggest goals. We really want to get to that point where we can, based on the relationship with the individual, suggest something. Maybe, someone had therapy before. I mentioned, have you been working with your therapist recently? That could be a really helpful resource for you right now. Or I have this great list of therapists that I was given last year. I'd be happy to share it with you. So a lot of ways, both more easily approachable ways and other more significant ways to offer individuals and share those resources. And then that last piece is encouraging self-help and other support strategies. So this could be maybe an individual regularly attends church and they share that they haven't been going. So you could ask some questions about that, but a follow-up could be, have you thought about joining your group on Sundays again? And that could be for any activity or group or support that is important for the individual. And once again, it always looks different. If you have met this person 10 minutes before, how you approach this might be different than if it's your sister or your partner or a student that you're working with, for example. So That's a little bit of kind of what that looks like. And as I mentioned, the curriculum itself spends the full day really diving into that, practicing that. And we also have lots of knowledge checks. So I'm going to have everyone answer this question just based on what we've already chatted about today. So reducing stigma is not an important part of being a mental health first aider. Is that a true or false? If you don't mind dropping that in the chat. Awesome. Great. Yeah, I see lots of false. So this is an example from the curriculum of our knowledge checks from the first segment. So this is where we're really just making sure everyone has that groundwork, kind of starting very easy with the questions, making sure those key themes are familiar for everyone. We'll do a couple more. So the next question is, our health beliefs and health behaviors are connected to our culture, true or false? Great. Yeah, I see lots of truths coming in. Wonderful. So absolutely, like I said, I'm always impressed with how much we do talk about culture in the curriculum. I think they do a great job with that and really helping people think outside of how they may approach a mental health challenge themselves and look a little bit more globally. Great. And our last one is, recovery is achievable and attainable for people who have experienced a mental health challenge, true or false? Wonderful. Yes, that is absolutely true. As I mentioned, the hope for recovery, really encouraging folks to have their autonomy and say for recovery and mental health and substance misuse challenges. The individual is still the one in charge. So we, as a mental health first aider, are just providing the tools to help encourage them to make those decisions and get professional help to help guide those decisions. So encouraging recovery and hope is a key component. Thank you all for your responses in the chat. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the section of the course that does discuss worsening signs and symptoms and knowing when a situation has become a crisis. So what the curriculum does well is really reminding folks that you are always reassessing. Perhaps a pretty light conversation where someone is sharing that they're having a hard time, but it's nothing too significant, could quickly change to a situation where you are then in a place preparing yourself to ask a hard question. So listening, being open-minded, and remembering that it could change is important. The section of the training that I think is the most impactful and I think is beneficial for anyone, and is also the hardest part of the training, is the section where we do learn how to assess for risk of suicide. This is a section that, there's a lot of different resources, and depending on where you work and your professional experiences, maybe you've had a training of how to prepare yourself to do a risk assessment. And even if you're not, in a clinical role, having that practice in a safe space is really monumental. So the curriculum has a action plan. Ultimately, it kind of has a yes, no, the questions that you would ask an individual. If they said yes, that they were thinking about killing themselves, it then directs you to the different steps that you would ask and ultimately helps you guide you to a decision. Do you need emergency services right away? And then what are those resources if you were in that situation? The curriculum also does have everyone stop and unmute if they're comfortable and has them ask out loud those difficult questions. And I will tell you that being able to ask those questions in a training, it's still very uncomfortable. It can be really hard, and it's always everyone's choice if they're willing to unmute and do that. But I have had to ask that question, and having the practice through the mental health first aid curriculum, I think, is the only way that I did feel prepared in the moment. So that, I would say, is one of the most impactful pieces of the curriculum that is really, really important. So they refer to that as asking the question. With that, and before we get to the part of the training, we also talk a lot about myths, because myths around suicide can cause a lot of damage, and also even if it's a myth, it might seem easy to believe, or it might be an assumption that we have about suicide. So we're gonna do actually a couple myths or facts. If you're comfortable responding myth or fact in the chat for these, I have 3 of them and they are all relating to suicide. The first one is one of the most important ones, in my opinion. So asking a person about suicide will encourage the person to attempt suicide. What do we think for that one? Awesome. Rapid fire myth. So this is something that I think is easy to think. A lot of people do think that, well, I don't want to bring it up. Maybe they're not thinking about it. I don't want to put those thoughts in their mind. I don't want to encourage it. It's a very reasonable myth or something that we've probably heard. But the truth is that it is a myth and the opposite is true. So asking directly about their suicidal feelings will often lower their anxiety level and can act as a deterrent. Also, sometimes if someone has suicidal thoughts, asking gives them that avenue to kind of take that pressure off and have that space to talk about it. And then as a mental health first aider, being prepared to share those resources is a great next step. So yes, that is a myth and a really important one. Next one, suicide occurs in every socioeconomic group. True, myth or fact? That is a fact, yes. So while studies do report different prevalence rates, it is important to know that it does occur in every socioeconomic group. And our last one, and this one, there's always a lot of debate. I don't think this is an easy myth or fact, but suicide happens without warning. This one usually elicits a lot of conversation in the course. Good, so I see some myths coming in. That is right. So that is a myth. Every situation is different. So yeah, I appreciate the sometimes. Every situation is different. So I don't think it's as black and white to say, but what's really important and what they're emphasizing here with this question from the curriculum is that typically there are many clues and warning signs, and sometimes they're really subtle. So often there may be signs, they might be subtle. There are situations where that might not be the case. So through learning the warning signs, the ability to save a life really increases just by knowing and recognizing something that we might, have before the course dismissed as not too worrisome, perhaps is a warning sign that we want to make sure we address. So thank you all for participating in that. I appreciate it. So the 988 Lifeline is super important in the curriculum, and it's also something that I have personally found very important. So this is actually a quote from myself. I took the course a couple years ago and then was certified last year. And even though I've spent my career working with students, making referrals, helping students even get them connected with the counseling center or walk-in crisis center, I had a situation with my family where I used the mental health first aid curriculum and was able to call and contact 988 in a way that I don't know I would have had the same confidence to do. So it was 2 New Year's ago. My father was having a mental health crisis. We were in a long holiday weekend, so the normal, doctors, offices were not available for us. And it was a really challenging situation that a lot of my family members were very fearful of even reaching out to 988. So knowing as a mental health first aid instructor, all of the information and being able to confidently say, this is a mental health crisis that we're in, and it's important that we take action now. I was able to call the helpline. My father's a veteran, so if you call 988 and you press 1, you get connected to the veterans line, which if you know veterans, that can be so important, having those resources for them and being able to talk to someone who has experience working with veterans or is a veteran themselves. And for the next 48 hours, I was able to remain in contact with different behavioral health resources in my community as they helped guide me through monitoring my father's signs and symptoms, gave me language and things to ask and help, and also offered to speak to him directly as well. So for me, being able to just talk to them as a concerned daughter was really monumental and helped myself and my father and our family take those next steps without calling 911 or other things that, for many reasons, could escalate the situation and would not, in that case, have been the right move. So I share that just because when you are in the moment, it can be hard. So knowing what your plan is going to be can be really helpful. All right, so I will probably end up skipping just a few slides, but they will be in the slides that you receive. I wanted to make sure I have plenty of content, but turns out mental health first aid, there is plenty to go on. So we are going to talk briefly before the Q&A about substance use crisis and what that looks like in the mental health first aid curriculum. So in the curriculum, it's mentioned as mental health challenges and substance use challenges can go hand in hand. And also, we want to assess them often in a similar way. So the curriculum doesn't go into depth. However, it does have a video that shows an individual who is overdosing on an opioid and receives Narcan or naloxone. So Narcan is a life-saving opioid overdose reversal drug. It is widely available, highly effective. It is non-addictive, and it specifically will reverse an opioid overdose. So I'm sure we've heard a lot in the previous years about Narcan. We're very aware that the opioid crisis has changed with the introduction of fentanyl in illegal settings. So since fentanyl is very, very inexpensive to make, and it is very strong, we are seeing it a lot. I think we are finally seeing some data just this past year, these past 6 months, that demonstrates we are seeing a decrease for the first time. So that's promising news. And I think Narcan has a really big piece in that. So fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. So it takes a very small amount. And this might be a little hard to see here. But when we talk about the opioid crisis, we talk about it in 3 different waves. So it started with prescription opioids in the early 2000s. So those were prescribed, being overprescribed by doctors. Second wave, we're seeing more deaths related to heroin. But then this green line here represents the third wave, which is when we saw primarily fentanyl, but we saw synthetic opioids truly just changing that. That increase is very, very significant. So this only shows to 2020. Like I said, we are starting to see a slight decline. But the importance of this and why I share it is anytime I get a chance to share a couple of these slides, they're so powerful to me. I like to share them when I can. So fentanyl is highly lethal and only takes 2 milligrams. So this pencil point image to me really stands out. That's the equivalent of 5 grains of salt. And what's happening is often it's an unintentional poisoning. So on college campuses, we've seen overdose deaths where a student thought they were taking an Adderall to study. Perhaps they've never tried another substance. And at CU Boulder specifically, we've had quite a few opioid-related overdoses. So really important information, and important to note that this has become truly a poisoning and can be so present in so many substances. So for example, that could be more of recreational party drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, but also could see that laced in illicit prescription medications, counterfeit pills like Xanax, Adderall, or Percocet. The chocolate chip cookie effect, you all may have heard of fentanyl test strips. They are a big help. They can detect if there's fentanyl in a substance by dissolving it in water, but the challenge is most people would not want to dissolve it. You would have to dissolve it entirely to ensure that there wouldn't be fentanyl. So often it's distributed unevenly, so there could still be a lethal amount. Last slide I'm going to show here so we can have plenty of time for Q&A. This is the slide that I think is the most alarming for me. This statistic here from the DEA is that nearly half of all counterfeit pills tested that they confiscated had a lethal dose of fentanyl. That's a statistic from 2022. And these pictures show that it is nearly impossible to tell the difference in a counterfeit pill. So they are created in a way that it is almost impossible to know the difference. So like I said, sharing this as kind of an extension of the mental health first aid curriculum, it is mentioned. And when we get to this part of the training, I always mention and encourage folks to seek out an opioid overdose response training that we offer on campus. So if that's something you are all interested in learning more about, I definitely encourage you to do a little bit more looking into that. And in these slides, like I mentioned, there's a couple more slides with more information of how to administer Narcan. It is now available over the counter, and many public health agencies across the US will provide it for free. There's also a video in here that shows you how to administer it. It's a nasal spray. It's extremely easy, and it will not hurt someone if they were actually having an overdose from a different substance. So like I mentioned, I want to make sure we have time. So I encourage you, if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me or go ahead and look at those slides or do some investigation on Google yourself. Resources here, like I mentioned, 988, their website here with SAMHSA is really great. But one resource that I really love is this mental health first aid resource here on their site. They have a huge comprehensive list of all sorts of mental health resources, both for youth, teen, adults, and a variety of other areas and substance misuse as well. And then that final website that was sent in the chat earlier is where you can find the information that I shared today, as well as how to take a course. And then it is time for Q&A. So I appreciate your participation in the chat and would love to hear any questions either from the chat or anyone who wants to unmute.
Thank you so much, Victoria. We'll wait and see if some questions come in, but I've got one I could start us off with.
Okay.
So I have taken the mental health first aid course twice, and I think there was about 5 years between my two opportunities to do that. I know it's not a one and done thing, you know, and we may not practice what we learn, but is the curriculum updated like every so often? So like if I took it, should I take it with some regularity if I have an opportunity to do so?
Yeah, Dana, that's a great question. So I would say it is absolutely updated, and especially if there's significant data that emerges that they add or that comes up, it's added. However, it's usually fairly consistent every 5 years. So their recommendation is every 10 years. But that's not to say that, you know, maybe your job shifts or maybe your community shifts and you're in a place where you might have a higher likelihood, or maybe you're helping support a loved one with a mental health challenge. The course might feel a little bit different if you were to do it 5 years after you did it the first time. So I definitely encourage it if you have the opportunity. And I would say it definitely changes within 10 years. I actually noticed one of the first videos I shared was about 7 years, and even some of the language used in that video has shifted. So they do a great job keeping it updated and just giving yourself an opportunity to spend some time dedicating to it, even every 5 years, I think is a great idea. So great question, Dana.
And let's see. Someone asked, you may have already mentioned this, but are these classes available online or in person?
Yeah, another great question. So both, and that all depends on where you're looking. There's a lot of virtual classes through really all over. So for example, here in Colorado, we have a behavioral health resource called WellPower, and they will have a directory of all the different places across the state of Colorado where you can take the mental health first aid course. Some of those are at senior centers or community centers or within your township. And you could even take a course in a different state as well. So if it's virtual, which a lot of them are, there's really a good amount, I would say 50-50, depending on where you are, of in-person if you prefer that modality, or virtual. And the benefit of that is, yeah, you could take it, you could take one in Philadelphia and you're in California. So if you look at that directory, there's a search function, like I mentioned, on the Mental Health First Aid website. Does a really great job linking all of the available ones. And then for Region 4, if hopefully when we move forward with that, that would be offered virtually for those 6 hours. And then there's always, almost always 2 hours of pre-work ahead of time.
And if you, so like in your role as a trainer for this program, you know, if anybody taking the initial training was interested in that, what kind of requirements are necessary for you to retain your, I guess, certification for that?
Yeah, as an instructor, do you mean, Dana?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, yes, great question. So, like I mentioned, one thing I love about it is it both to take the course and to become an instructor is very inclusive. You do not need an advanced degree. You don't need a certain amount of credits in, you know, college credits. So you do need to have taken the course yourself, and then you go through the training. It's a 3-day training online, and you do a test, ultimately a small practice exam where you'll work with the Mental Health First Aid national trainers. They're really wonderful. So you spend 3 days together, you present a portion of the curriculum, and then they will pass you, and then you're required to teach 3 courses each year. So that's your main requirement. And then as a mental health first aid instructor, you are required to retake the course itself every 10 years. So that is one requirement. But the certifications of the mental health first aid course in general do not technically expire. So yeah, great question. And it's, like I said, it's just lovely to see so many different folks from different backgrounds be able to be a trainer without that barrier to entry.
And I think you might have mentioned this, or maybe I read it and thought you said it, I don't know, or maybe both. But the training, there are trainings available in Spanish.
There are, yes. And so there's trainings available in Spanish for all 3 curriculums. So the adult curriculum, you know, the main difference is that we're going to approach a teenager or a student in elementary school very different than we're going to approach, you know, a peer. So their main approach does look different. I have not taken either of those courses. I would really love to, but those are available. So 3 different types for different populations, and then all of those are available in English and Spanish as well.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat box. I'm going to, or if anybody has a question they just want to unmute and ask, that'd be great too.
Thanks, Dana. This is Marcus. Sorry, I don't have a question, but I did take the course about 6 years ago, and I just wanted to share with everybody who's attending that it was incredibly useful, both personally and also anyone who works in a public-facing capacity in higher education or anywhere else can really get a lot out of it. So I just encourage everyone to pursue it.
Great. Thanks for sharing your experience, Marcus. I feel the same way. I thought it was really eye-opening. And you also, I found that for myself, like I was checking in on myself. You know, like, oh, maybe that's why I'm feeling this way about that. Like it's a very interesting training.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some testimonials that even say that people feel they're doing it for others and realize the huge impact or maybe a level of awareness that it brings for them. Yeah. And I appreciate the question. Hate to have to ask about this, but what is the cost? So that's a great question, Kate. That does look different everywhere. So I will say for our organization, there are a lot of grants actually. So if you're in a position in an institution, I would also encourage looking into those. That's how we first brought mental health first aid to our campus. We had a grant that allowed us for 2 years to get instructors trained and then also provide the course for free to our students, staff, and faculty. Right now, it costs $50 for like community members who want to take it with us, or folks in the Denver like partner organizations that we have. That is a bit of a discount just because we are an educational institution and working with other partners. So that is the rate I've seen more or less when I also have looked at it in other states and areas. But I will say there's a little bit of a range, and it might go up a little bit as we see everything kind of increasing in cost, but definitely fluctuates. Yeah, it's an important question. Thanks, Kate.
All right. Well, unless we have any further comments, I will go ahead and drop the link for the CE for the Medical Library Association into the chat. And again, Victoria, thank you so much. It was really fun working with you. We basically work for the same organization, but
yeah,
we never see each other. So it was really great to hear from you and learn more about this really important program. If any time in human history, it's probably really important right now that we have these skills. So thank you again for being with us. And then for everybody who is here, you will receive an email once the video recording is available, and we'll have the link to Victoria's great slides. So we thank everybody for being here today, and I'll hang out for just a little bit if anybody has questions. But other than that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Dana. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.